morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, April the 14th. Good to have you with us today. This is Good Friday, and we have Larry Brown, singer, songwriter, storyteller with us. Good to have you here, Larry.
Good morning, Paul.
Easter weekend, and you have a story today, right?
It's a historical narrative this morning that I thought would fit some of the attitude reflections of this time of the year for Christians, for Jews, for other religious folk who think about this as a particularly sacred week and a particularly sacred day. So It's in keeping with the themes of today.
All right. So here's Larry Brown.
As she was led to the platform, she looked up at that razor-sharp edge, and she thought for a moment, it has a kind of a warming, glistening to it on that winter afternoon. She had chosen not to wear a blindfold, but she had not chosen to be first to face the guillotine, for right behind her were her brother Hans and her good friend Christoph. At age 21, she was the youngest of the three to be executed. But perhaps she thought she'd lived more than a lifetime since she first joined the cause and now was facing its consequences. Now, their trial in the People's Court had been conducted just 4 days after their arrest, and the trial was just that morning, if one could call it a trial. For the judge who had been called in from the capital basically went on a rant against these three heretics. He proclaimed that he could not understand how three youth from good families and good schools could have left a patriotic organization and become traitors to their beloved country. Well, Sophie said, someone had to start it, and what we wrote, many believed what we said. Or she also addressed the judge and said, they just didn't dare to express their feelings as we could. Now, Sophie and Hans' parents, Robert and Magdalena Scholl, had tried to enter the courtroom, but they were not allowed. In fact, they didn't know the verdict nor the sentence until they were taken to Sophie's cell for their last farewells. Sophie was strong and she smiled. She was pleasant for her parents in this last meeting, although there was an official who later reported that she was crying after parents left the cell. Now, before and during the war, the majority of citizens had hailed the regime for its making the country great again. But with reports of mass arrests, mass incarcerations, and mass executions of the interior enemies, resistance was building. In 1942, Sophie and Hans Scholl and their college friends, there was Alexander Schlemmel, there was Willy Graf and Christopher Proff, and even their philosophy professor, they had joined in the movement that they called the White Rose Society. Now, that name may have come from a poem of a century before or even a contemporary book, but at least they chose that to say this is one sign of purity in a time of destruction. They used the White Rose Society to publish a series of leaflets that had essays that decried the evil and the tyranny of the Hitler regime. And they secretly produced and distributed them, first at the University of Munich, and then began to spread to other college campuses. In fact, at about the same time, graffiti was beginning to appear, things that said, "Down with Hitler," or "Hitler is a mass murderer," or simply the cry, "Freedom, freedom." In total, 6 leaflets were distributed. The first, entitled The White Rose, accused the Nazi regime of arresting German citizens and destroying the country and calling for resistance. Subsequent publications identified the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of Jews. It was calling for the sabotage of Nazi factories and meetings. It was pleading with Christians to condemn Hitler. And also it was warning that Germany would be hated by the rest of the world for what was happening. Now, from the start, the Gestapo was trying to find out where these publishers were coming from, these unnamed people, trying to track down who the authors were. But the authors themselves, Sophie and Hans and others, were being careful to change printing locations, to change mailing sites, and to change methods of distribution. But on February 1943, Hans and Sophie were arrested and indicted for treason. They'd been captured at the University of Munich while distributing the 6th leaflet. And actually they found in their possession the draft copy of what would have been the 7th leaflet. Their trial and subsequent conviction was held at Stadelheim prison. On that very same day that they were executed, February 22, 1943, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had made his famous enemies of the state, the total war on internal enemies, as he called it, speech to thousands in the Berlin Sports Plaza. Years ago, Sophie and Hans' father, Robert, had said to them, "I just want you to live uprightly in the spirit of freedom, but no matter how difficult things may be." And Hans' last words, as he was at the guillotine, he shouted out, "Freedom! Long live freedom!" Now today there are more than 200 schools that are named after Sophie and her family. And thousands of people will visit their graves and the memorials and the streets and plazas that are in their honor. And there have been books and movies, and today that story is being told of Sophie and the White Rose.
And that is a true story.
That is a true story.
Thank you, Larry Brown. That's a beautiful story for Good Friday. If people want more of your stories or
personal appearances, I'd be glad to come.
How do they get in touch with you?
brownstory@hotmail.com. Best way to reach me.
It almost left me speechless here with a lump in my throat listening to that story. Larry Brown, it's a pleasure having you here. Monday, Como Wellness, and we'll find out about Jabberwocky Studios. Hope you have a very pleasant weekend, a happy Easter, and if you're going to be with your friends and family, I hope it's a joyous day. Something you'd like to hear or see, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email. That's pepperp@missouri.edu. And if you're going to be on the highways and byways, be careful. See you Monday.